I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the AANS Leaders in Neurosurgery series. It gives me no greater pleasure than to sit here with my mentor, my friend, actually the one who is considered by many as the father of neurosurgical endovascular surgery, Nick Hopkins. My name is Elad Levy. I'm the chair at Buffalo, succeeding again our interviewee, Nick Hopkins. Nick, welcome.
Thanks.
So your journey has been amazing, and it's one that I think many people would love to hear you share with them. Tell us from the onset, how did you have the idea that we can treat vascular diseases through arteries, and what was it like being sort of that pioneer in the late 90s?
Yeah. Actually, it was, what was it? Late 70s. And so in the 70s, I was a resident, and the subject of angiography was relatively new. It was invented really in 1927 by Moniz, and but it took a long time for it to get going, as most things do. Then during the residency, we had a couple of really good neuro radiologists who had learned how to do angiography. And they basically taught me how to put a needle in the carotid artery and to inject dye. And angiography back then was very crude. But after doing that, I looked at these images, and then I went back and read all about Moniz and looked at the images as he produced. And I said, my God, if we can just enter the vascular system anywhere, there's a highway right to the vascular system at the base of the brain. And almost nobody at that point was actually accessing the cerebral vasculature with catheters. There were angiography. It's the same thing in cardiology back then. There was no coronary intervention. It was all, they had learned how to do coronary angiography. So I became intrigued with why can't we use this pathway to create a minimally invasive approach to the brain? Because neurosurgery back then, as you know, was pretty crude, pretty dangerous, very high risk. And so I thought, maybe there's a better way. And so when I got toward the end of my training in neurosurgery, I started talking to the radiologists, and I wanted them to teach me what was then the Seldinger technique, which was quite new. We were doing everything percutaneously back then, and they refused. They said, no, you're a neurosurgeon. You don't want to mess with this stuff. And I said, oh, okay. And so I went down the hall, and there was a cardiologist by the name of Elad Germanovich, who had trained at the Cleveland Clinic with Mason Sones, and he was doing coronary angiography using the Mason Sones technique, which was catheterize the brachial artery. And they cut down on the brachial artery, put a little catheter in, and then they went and did their coronary angiogram. It took them about maybe 5 minutes to cut down. And then, it was a straight shot to the heart. And so I got Eli to teach me how to do that. And then the first 25 or 30 angiograms that I did, I used that technique. And then it dawned on me that the Seldinger technique was no big deal. It was just a different artery. And so I scrounged up some Seldinger needles, and I started putting, catheters in the femoral arteries. And that led to, a whole career. And so I was blessed to have really great people that around me who they thought I was crazy, but they didn't put up any huge barriers. So I went, to the point where I finished my training. A patient came along with a wicked carotid cavitous fistula. I was protruding losing vision rapidly. And I had heard about a triple lumen balloon developed by a urologist in Boston. His name was Prolo. And I convinced him to give me a couple of those. And so the treatment of carotid cavernous fistula back then, as you know, was pretty crude. You cut down on the leg and embolized a bunch of muscle and then prayed for the best. So I was able to cut down on the carotid artery, introduce this catheter, and I got it up across the fistula, and I blew up the balloon, and the damn thing was gone almost immediately. And that was a real epiphany for me, that it was so simple with the right tools. And so I coiled that catheter up, put some clips on it, and buried it in the neck, and then all was well. The guy was basically cured. But about a month later, he came back with this huge lump in his neck from the catheter. So I took him back to the OR and cut the catheter down, put a bunch more clips on it, and he was cured. And that was the beginning of my crazy career. And from then on, I had, I was, at that point, I was considered a curiosity by the neurosurgery community. Like, oh, what's this goofball doing? And then subsequently, the radiologists, who were admittedly, we had neurosurgery abandoned angiography back in the 30s and 40s and gave it over to the radiologists because neurosurgeons were just too darn busy. And so radiology had taken over angiography, and then they saw this neurosurgeon, the interloper is what they called me, doing something with catheters in the head when they thought that was their turf, even though they weren't doing anything.
Yeah, it was amazing because you went from curiosity to sort of a triple threat, and not triple threat in the way we mean in academics, but you went from a curiosity of threatening neurovascular surgery, threatening interventional radiology, eventually threatening neurology, creating a paradigm for interventional stroke, which people don't know. The interventional stroke, a lot of the fundamental papers and the initial research came out of here in Buffalo when I was your fellow and a few years before. And you mentioned crude. The tools were incredibly crude, and I can remember steam shaping catheters with you. I can't believe I'm that old. And detachable balloons, still at the end of the detachable balloons era. And we contrast that to one of your closest friends and colleagues, Robert Spetzler, who was elegant in doing surgery, yet even with these crude tools, you started becoming a threat because the future was innovation, and eventually technology would catch up to your vision and the tools would become supple, innovative, nuanced, and we'd be able to have better outcomes than with traditional surgery for appropriate cases.
Yeah, anything new in medicine is looked on with suspicion, and so was this. And so you're right. I started out as a curiosity, and I moved from there to being a pariah, and then eventually, when it all worked out, I became quite unexpectedly a hero, and that's the last thing I expected. But the opposition from the world of radiology was fierce back then. And I remember being at a meeting of the American Society of Neuroradiology, and the president of the society, whose name shall remain anonymous, she was from Salt Lake, and she just lambasted me. She knew I was there, and I happened to be sitting in the back of the room with Van Halbach, and all the radiologists were my buddies, but the radiological organization was infuriated at this interloper. So that of course, what that did is really fired me up, got me to the point where I said, I think anytime somebody really said no to me through my whole career, that got me going, and it still does. And so I just took off from there, and it was from then on an amazing experience, because finally the radiologists realized they weren't going to shut me up. I mean, I was publishing and lecturing, and I remember the first big neurosurgery meeting that I went to, a vascular meeting out in Oregon. I spent weeks preparing this elegant lecture on what I was doing and why neurosurgery needed to be in this game. And about maybe 5-6 minutes into my lecture, Alan, and it was in Salisham, Oregon. I look out in the audience. You know what I saw? I saw nothing but newspapers. Everybody was reading their newspapers. They could have given a damn about what I was doing, and that, you know, that fired me up some more. So that's kind of the way my career started. And then I think for me, the big and exciting moment in my career was when I was approached by two people, a neurosurgeon and a cardiologist. Both wanted to learn how to do what I was doing. And I was like, okay, what the heck? Come on board. And that was the beginning of the fellowship. And what all of us have produced over the last, I don't know how many years, is probably somewhere near 75 fellows. And they are, many of them are absolute leaders in the field. And when you think about, okay, what's your legacy? You know, for me, the legacy is all these young guys we've trained that are now superstars in the field, like you.
Well, thank you. It's 2001 was sort of the turning point in my career when you were gracious enough to take me as a fellow. But I want to drill down on that. There are a lot of fellowships, a lot of places to train. And you're right, your legacy is that of these 75 fellows, so many of them have gone into academic medicine. They're chairs or vice chairs or division heads. They're involved in organized neurosurgery. Why do you think, what is special? And culture starts from the top. How did you develop this culture of inquisitiveness, innovation, and the desire to continue to push the envelope and give back to neurosurgery at large? It's truly a cultural thing here.
You know, the honest answer is, I don't have a clue. All I know is I was doing what I was doing, and then teaching some of these young guys what I was doing. And then the fellowship began to grow. And, you know, we had a couple of real flops in the beginning, but, you know, we finally got to a point where we developed a fellowship that really changed people's lives, changed neurosurgeons' lives. And that was enormously, made me incredibly proud. And so, so that was one of the real exciting things in my life. And of course, the other really exciting thing was, you know, running a department with all you guys, because I didn't have to do anything except get out of the way and support everyone. And I think that's the secret. You know, yeah, if you hire somebody, you support the daylights out of him, get out of his way, and let him do what he does. And if he gets into trouble and needs help, you go to bat for him. And over time, people's initiative and creativity comes out. And, you know, that is something that I think was, you know, exciting for me, and epiphany for me throughout the years that I was training people. And then the whole Spessler thing was really interesting, because he was my best friend in neurosurgery. But he thought I was nuts too. And we must have had 20 debates, and it got into which is better, open or catheter-based neurosurgery. And I remember people in the audience laughing and during these debates. And I, you know, when that happened, you know what I did? I put up a graph that showed, it was from industry, and it showed the progression of endovascular compared to open surgery. And endovascular took the lead after a relatively short period of time. And I'm proud to say today, I'm hearing that about 70% of all neurointerventional procedures are led by neurosurgeons. And now, of course, radiologists and neurologists are often coming together with neurosurgeons to share their experiences and work together. And that's pretty exciting too. So all in, it was, it's been a heck of a career. I can't, and mostly because I was surrounded by all you guys who made my life fun and easy. So
you've been tremendously inspirational. So clearly the field of neurosurgical endovascular attributed in a large part to your fortitude, and you continue to push ahead. But your leadership isn't just in endovascular. You were one of the first to develop a complications conference where, in a time when people wanted to only show their successes or their great saves or their amazing cases, you were focused on teaching through personal disaster and your other leadership pieces in a time when industry was considered, as to use a word you used earlier, a pariah, or there should be a firewall between academic medicine and industry. In only that Nick Hopkins style, you built a bridge and demonstrated that innovation only happens when we work with these colleagues, and you built meetings around that. So can you talk about your leadership both around those two meetings?
Sure. In the beginning, I was blessed to have a wonderful friend at UCSF. His name was Grant Yoshima. And Grant trained he trained at Tulane, then went to Harbor. But then he moved up to San Francisco, and he was really the first guy to really build a practice around intervention. And I heard about him, called him, and then I went out and visited him. And then every couple of weeks, I was spending a day or two with Grant. And I learned an awful lot about what a wonderful and humble human being he was, and how talented he was. And he and I collaborated for many years. And it was interesting because Grant was a radiologist, but he saw way back when the value of training neurosurgeons. And so he was like me, he was training other neurosurgeons. But one of the things that popped up over and over again was that this stuff is high risk. And if something goes wrong with a catheter in the head, it's probably either a major stroke or a death. And so Grant and I said, we gotta share our disasters with others so that we can hopefully improve. And there were very few of us back then, but we decided to have a meeting, and we had, I think, 8 or 9 of us. Then there was one guy that nobody knew sitting in the back of the room, and I noticed he had a yellow legal pad. And Grant went back and he said, well, who are you? And the guy was a plaintiff's malpractice attorney. And so we escorted him out of the building, and then we moved the meeting to Colorado, but we were at altitude 9,500 feet, and everybody got mountain sickness. And then I said, okay, enough of this. And we had just bought a place in Jackson Hole. So we moved the meeting to Jackson Hole, and it's been there ever since. And exciting to say that this year we had near 200 people, all sharing their worst complications. And that experience benefits everyone. And people always are saying it's the meeting where I learn the most and save the most lives. And then I found that when I needed equipment, like something we didn't have in neuro, I would sneak up to the cardiac cath lab, and I would start asking around. I developed some friendships up there, and they had stuff we hadn't even dreamed about, never heard of. And like, for example, for vasospasm, all we had was these crude 3.5 millimeter balloons where you put one of those things in an artery and blow it up, you're liable to rupture the artery. Well, the cardiologist had 1 millimeter balloons. And so I started borrowing equipment from the cardiologist, and for vasospasm, it was perfect. And so I became a devotee of interventional cardiology, and people would come to the neurocath lab looking for me, and they say, "Oh God, he's up in the cardiac cath lab." So and cardiologists became our friends and our mentors in a way, and that was another epiphany for me, that another discipline has different perspectives. And so we had this new goofy idea that why don't we bring together just some leaders from the major vascular disciplines, cardiology, vascular surgery, radiology, and neuro. And let's just have a small meeting and talk about our complications among our multidisciplinary group of colleagues. So that was, I think that goes back to 1986 or 7 or 8, whatever. And that was a heck of an experience, because we learned very quickly that each of the different disciplines has a lot to offer the others. And that led to what is now called the Failure Analysis Advisory Council. And so that meeting still goes on today. So it's an absolutely great example of why collaboration is so important. Your willingness to give up some of your own territory to mix with others from other disciplines. And that led me to the Gates Vascular Institute, where a dear friend and colleague, Larry Jacobs, died in 2001. And the family wanted to do something to memorialize Larry. They wanted to do a neuroscience center. And I said, well, I'm not interested.
And this is Larry Jacobs, the developer of interferon, correct?
That's right. A great entrepreneur. Anyway, I said, I'm not interested in a neuroscience center, but if you want to do a vascular center, then I'm interested. And so his brother, Jeremy, basically hired 2 or 3 different consultants and to vet the idea. And most of them just came and said, well, let's just do a neuroscience center. And I said, no, we're not doing that. And then finally, he hired the Tiber Group from Chicago, and a guy who I knew, remember Jim Ausman? And
yeah, sure.
And Jim was the consultant for the Tiber Group. And Jim, on his 2nd or 3rd trip to Buffalo, he looked at me and he said, you know what, damn it. He said, I get it. What you want to do is really cool and unique. Because nobody ever done anything like this. The end result was we got all the innovative people together from that failure analysis meeting. And we sat with a phenomenal architect from LA, Mehrdad Yastani. And over 2.5 days, we planned the Gates Vascular and Jacobs and CTRC Institute. And what was absolutely fun for me was, the interdisciplinary interactions with Mehrdad. And then after only a couple of hours in our first meeting, Mehrdad had a big grin on his face. He said, I know what you guys want. You want collisions. You want to be bumping into each other. And we all said, yeah, because, as you know, all departments up all over the world are all in silos. You don't see your colleagues from other disciplines because you're so busy. And so
this morning we're doing a basilar aneurysm, and the patient went bradycardic on the table. I literally had kicked the door open. I said, get VJ, who's the interventional cardiologist, have him come into the room and tell me why this guy is going bradycardic and borderline asystolic on this table. And it's true, having everybody in this vascular center that again, it's your vision, and you have many gifts, but I think the people listening to this call need to understand one of your probably strongest gifts is you have a long vision. You can see far. And as your consultant, and as Dr. Ausman said, no one's done this. You basically said the vascular highway is the body. It's not neuro, it's not cardiac, it's not peripheral. It's a highway. Let's get everybody under one roof, break down the walls, open environment, we can learn and interact and collide, collisions with each other. And boy, when I need those cardiologists, they're right in there. And, unfortunately, when they have a stroke, because they're stenting a coronary or doing a TAVR or replacing a valve percutaneously, we get right up in there and hopefully do a thrombectomy.
That's one of my favorites. The patient doesn't even come off the table. They just call you guys over and you go up there, what's going on. So you put a catheter up there and fix it. That's really cool stuff. And the interactions over coffee every morning are so fascinating. And the collaboration among all the interventionists in the gates has led to so many cool things. And I won't bother to recount, but they're it's just amazing. And all it is, it's all about collaboration. It's about a cardiologist sitting, listening to a problem that one of us has and saying, well, hell, I got something that'll fix that. And then you do it together. And it was, it's just absolutely wonderful, wonderful experience. So I'm just, blessed to have gone through the career that I have, and blessed to have all you guys around me, because I don't think there's a better group in the world than what we have assembled at our place, and you're perpetuating.
Well, think about the paradigm shifts that were created here. So I remember when I was dropped off here at the gates, for the old gates, for my interview here for fellowship, and you're hearing about Buffalo and the great Nick Hopkins and everything coming out of here, and it's 2000, and the cab drops me off at the Millard Fillmore Gates before the Gates Vascular Institute, which was your vision with Murdad, and the cab drops me off, and I said, is this Millard Fillmore Gates? He said, yes. And I said, is there another Millard Fillmore Gates? It was such a small, you couldn't imagine what was coming out of here. And at the time, you had Barry Lieber, and you were using coronary stents for first flow diversion. Yeah. And obviously, we give Peter Kim Nelson from NYU, interventional radiologist, ton of credit for developing pipeline and transforming that field. But what people may not know is the early work of flow diversion was S670 stents. I remember those patients with you, those coronary stents overlapping. Stroke. The first FDA stent for acute stroke was done in Buffalo, the Sarah study. I think Jay Mako at the time, who was the vice chair at Sinai, was a fellow. We had Ricardo. So the paradigm shifts from flow diversion, we had a piece, or you're instrumental in stroke, from an era of rehabilitation to an era of intervention. Very critical, sort of the research and the patients coming out of Buffalo, the Sarah study, stent for stroke. Maybe I wasn't smart enough to remember to put it on a wire. The industry did that. And then
that was your vision. Your vision was the Sarah study. Yeah. And what you proved was that you can treat stroke with a stent. It ain't that hard.
That was your idea. I remember the day where you came to the lab and said, why can't we open these vessels the way the cardiologists open STEMI? Why can't we do the same thing? And you said, it's just a matter of time till we have the right devices. And you tell a great story of your first thrombectomy case with a wire. Maybe you want to share that story, which I think was probably one of the first thrombectomy cases in the globe.
Yeah, it was early 80s. And I got a call 7 o'clock at night. Dr. Hopkins, there's a friend of yours in the emergency room, and he's had a pretty major stroke. And I said, who is it? And they said, Bert Flickinger. I said, holy shit, this guy's he's the leader of everything in Western New York. And so I said, we'll take him up to the cath lab. We'll see what we can do. We put a catheter up there, and then we put a wire up, and we put a corkscrew curve on it. And we just pushed the catheter back and forth in the clot and injected all we had then was urokinase. And then by some miracle, the artery opened and Bert was normal in an hour.
You made your own Mercy clot retriever, basically.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah. So he was another epiphany. The other epiphany was the priest from Canisius High School, who came in with a major stroke because he was over at one of the other hospitals, and somebody said, you know what, we can't help him here. Send him over to this goofball over at Millard Fillmore. And we put a 5 French catheter up into the base of his skull, which we didn't think there was any way it was going to go up there. And it went slick as butter. And then I aspirated, because you always want to aspirate before you inject anything. Out came a clot. And then I injected some dye, and his artery was wide open, and he had a T occlusion. His artery was now wide open, and he was starting to recover. By the next morning, he was normal. So he had God on his side, but it worked. But those were just, the very beginning of catheter intervention for stroke. And now what you guys have done to perfect the technology and to cure so many people is extraordinary. And I'm just loving being a fly on the wall, watching you guys work. It's just very special for me.
I know in the waning minutes, obviously you have so many legacies and an army to carry your legacy across the country. For the future leaders who are listening to this, and the guys and the young men and women who are in academic neurosurgery, or maybe rising in the ranks of their community programs, what do you think what are the skills and the temperament future leaders should espouse?
I think
because you did it right.
Creativity and patience and tolerance. You got a young guy you're working with, and he makes a mistake. You don't jump all over him. You encourage him, and you try to teach him. And creativity, I think, means not just you, it means all the people around you, whether it is another physician, a nurse, a tech. You listen to everybody, and every now and then real pearls come pouring out from people that you never would expect. And that can lead to exciting new technology. And so creativity is a wonderful thing. And listening to people, you know what my favorite thing is in a meeting.
Yep.
When everybody starts yakking, and you'll see me hold up 2 fingers, and the message is, you got 2 ears, buddy. You've only got 1 mouth, so keep your mouth shut and listen.
Yeah. Listen twice as much as you speak. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth.
Exactly. So
you say that often.
It's been, especially with some people.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's been an absolutely wonderful, fun career. And the most important person in my career was always one, and sure you know who that is. It's Bonnie.
Sure.
Because no matter what kind of crazy things I was doing, she was totally supportive from the first days that I had our garage filled with brains and was practicing pituitary surgery in my garage till today, when she's just totally all over me and supportive of everything that I do. I don't know how she does it. I don't know why she does it.
She's a very special woman who I've really enjoyed getting to know over the past 2 decades. There's no question why you are a leader, why the amount you've contributed to modern and future neurosurgery and endovascular has been tremendous. I can think of very few who have done more for the neurosurgical community and the patients than you. Your legacy is your generosity, your benevolence, your education, and your inspiration. You continue to inspire generations of up-and-coming vascular neurosurgeons. And on behalf of all of us, thank you for all you've done.
Thank you a lot. Nothing would have ever happened without all you guys.
Thank you, Nick. And to everybody who's tuned in or logged in for the AANS Leaders in Neurosurgery series, thank you very much.